With the iPhone 14 series, Apple introduced what we think is the biggest gap between the regular and the Pro models in recent years. There are a bunch of new and improved features on the iPhone 14 Pro, where the iPhone 14 is essentially an iPhone 13 in fresh clothes. So which should you buy? Should you go for the more expensive one or save money? I'm Cam Bunton from Pocket-lint, and in this video I'll hopefully help you to decide. And while you're here, if you do like it, please do leave a thumbs up, subscribe and tap that notification bell to make sure you don't miss any more. So where's the biggest difference? There are a few things that make the experience of using these two phones different, and one of those is the design, which may not seem all that obvious since they look so similar, but when you pick them up there's a clear distinction in how they feel in the hand. The aluminium framed regular iPhone 14 feels a lot lighter than the steel framed 14 Pro. It's something we noticed immediately, having spent considerable time with the Pro and then picking up the 14. That's something that'll appeal to anyone who wants a lighter or more nimble device. Of course, there is advantage to the heavier steel frame. It gives the 14 Pro a real feeling of solidity and durability, although being shiny means it is very much a fingerprint magnet, where the anodized aluminium on the cheapest model is not. On the flip side, the matte frosted glass on the 14 Pro does feel nicer than the iPhone 14, and also doesn't show fingerprint smudges anywhere near as easily. The other key differentiator here, of course, is the dynamic island. The pill-shaped cutout on the iPhone 14 Pro's display doesn't just look different to the notch, but Apple decided to make it a software feature too, in a way that makes it part of the interface and not just an interference. Of course, that then means you use the phone a little differently too. When music is playing, you can control it using the widget at the top by long pressing the island, or you can see when you have timers running and get really handy visuals for things like when your phone is unlocked or Face ID is authenticating a payment, or what your next turn is on your Maps navigation. Does it change what you can do with your phone? Not really, but it is pretty cool. Another key differentiator is the camera system, and not just because you get an additional zoom lens. This of course means you can get 3 times optical zoom, so when you zoom in on the camera it's immediately obvious from the results that you retain a lot more sharpness and detail from the 14 Pro than when you zoom in on the iPhone 14 to the same level. And if you don't mind a little blurriness, you can zoom in even further, up to 15 times. Although the levels of detail do drop off considerably by this point. Likewise, the primary camera has an improved 48 megapixel sensor, and it's not necessarily just the sharpness that makes it better. It's that along with the improved processing, it seems to be quicker at capturing night mode shots, and its low light performance in general seems stronger. For those who care about these types of things, the Pro also gives you the ability to shoot Pro RAW shots, giving you much more data, and that means you get greater flexibility when editing in professional photo editing apps. Likewise, ProRes Video does the same for videographers. Both phones do still share a lot of similar features. You get cinematic mode for the background blur in video and pull focus effect, and you get Dolby Vision video recording too. Otherwise, you'll still get great results from the 14. In daylight, you'll find most of the time that the colors are relatively evenly balanced between the two phones. iPhones do tend to go for that high contrast, vivid color look by default, and that's the same on both devices. Where you might notice the difference is in depth of field. Focusing on objects quite close to the camera gives a much stronger background blur or bokeh on the iPhone 14 Pro. A little further down the list of differences, power and speed. And only really because although there is a more powerful processor in the iPhone 14 Pro, it's not the thing that strikes you most when using the phones side by side. Only because once you get into your apps and games, the difference is minimal. They're both speedy. What makes the bigger difference is actually the refresh rate of the display. The iPhone 14 Pro supports up to 120 Hz, and with its adaptive refresh rate technology, which it calls ProMotion, it can ramp up and down the refresh rate from 120 Hz all the way down to 1 Hz to match the content. It means that when you're scrolling through menus and switching between apps and screens, there's a real sense that the iPhone 14 Pro is much smoother and less stuttery, especially when you're moving quickly through those elements. When you've used that higher refresh for a while and then switch back to the regular 60 Hz screen on the 14, that's something you do notice. This adaptive refresh rate in the Pro has also meant Apple implemented an always-on function on the more expensive model. So when you put your phone down and you're not using it, the wallpaper dims and it highlights the clock, reducing the refresh rate all the way down to 1 Hz to save battery, but still giving you the ability to see what notifications you have waiting and any widgets and clocks that you have on your lock screen. So is there any way the iPhone 14 is actually better than the 14 Pro in terms of performance? And in a way, yes, sort of. If you care about battery life more than anything, you will get a bit better battery life on the iPhone 14 than on the 14 Pro. But then again, that does depend on how you use your phone, and in truth, there's not that much in this. We found both phones more than capable of lasting a full day, even on busy days. And depending on how busy we were, we found we could finish the day between 30 and 40% left over with about 2 or 3 hours of casual usage, mostly split between web browsing, social media, and gaming. And that's even with the always-on display switched on. Once you start using the camera though, the battery does drain quite quickly. So what won't you miss if you go for the cheaper model? There are a couple of things we found are similar on both devices that you won't miss on the iPhone 14. A big part of that is just software. It's iOS 16, and minus that dynamic island, you get the same interface and features on the iPhone 14 as you get on the iPhone 14 Pro. And it'll be supported with updates for a good few years, and we'll get them as soon as the iPhone 14 Pro does. Similarly, when watching video on the two phones side by side, it struck us how similar the two are in terms of color reproduction and sharpness. They're practically identical here, although the iPhone 14 Pro does have a brighter screen. But you don't really lose anything when it comes to the quality of the image, so your favorite shows will look basically the same on both. You also get the same charging speeds, both wired and wirelessly with MagSafe with both phones. Neither is blazing fast to refill, but if you charge overnight, that's not much of an issue. Still, with a wired connection, you can get about half the battery refilled in 30 minutes. With the right charger, of course, which doesn't come in the box. So in the end, what's the conclusion? Well, this is a bit of a weird one, because at this point in time, the iPhone 14 isn't a phone that we necessarily recommend. And that's for a couple of reasons. It doesn't really offer much more than the phones from the iPhone 13 series, so personally I think if you don't want to spend money on the iPhone 14 Pro, go for last year's iPhone 13 Pro instead. It's got more going for it than the iPhone 14. Or if you really want to save money, get the iPhone 13. It's got pretty much everything that the iPhone 14 has. Otherwise, this year, getting the Pro phone definitely gets you a better phone. It's a better all-round device with better cameras, display, and new features. It's the one to get from this year's refresh. Hands down. Let me know what you think of these two phones in the comments down below. Which have you gone for, or which are you thinking of getting? Or you can get me on Twitter. I'm at Cam Bunton over there. Again, if you did like this video, please do leave a thumbs up. It helps us a great deal. Tap subscribe and the notification bell to make sure you don't miss any more of our uploads. And I'll see you again in the next one. Bye for now.